Hi guys, welcome to the channel. Today we're going to be doing a valve adjustment on a 2007 Honda CBR600RR. The process is pretty much going to be the same for any model year of this bike, and I would say pretty similar to any Japanese 4-cylinder sport bike. To get the job done, I'm going to be using the Haynes service manual. If you're going to do this job at home, I highly recommend you pick one up. So why is it important to check and adjust our valves? It's important because we're trying to see whether the valve is opening and closing properly. If it doesn't open properly, not enough air is going to get into our cylinder and the bike will misfire. If it doesn't close properly, not only will you lose cylinder compression, but those hot exhaust gases can actually burn your valve seat and possibly do damage to the cylinder head. So how do you know you need a valve adjustment? There are three cases. Case number one, your bike won't idle. So you'll start it, maybe rev it out, but when you let off the throttle, it'll die. This indicates that our valves are too tight and not enough air is going to get into the cylinder. Case number two, you'll hear a ticking noise coming from the engine. So when you turn it on, you'll hear it ticking. That's basically the camshaft actually slapping the follower. And that indicates that our valves are too loose and we need a larger shim. Case number three, which is my case, is I'm just sticking to the scheduled maintenance. So every 16,000 miles we end up doing a valve adjustment. Right on, these are the tools we're going to use to get the job done. First we got a decent socket. I would say you would probably need a couple high-walled sockets, a 16 mil in particular, just for the spark plugs. Flathead screwdriver, Phillips head screwdriver, little magnetic pick tool for working it within the cylinder head, a little pick tool for some of the connectors, metric Allen keys, and a torque wrench. The torque wrench needs to have a range from 0 to 50. I just have 2 because this one doesn't go all the way down to 0. And then for the specialty stuff, you're going to need a micrometer. It doesn't need to be digital, you just have an analog one. It'll work fine. And then a decent set of feeler gauges. So we'll take this step by step. The first thing we're going to have to remove is the gas tank. Then we're going to remove the steering dampener, airbox, move the radiator. The good thing is with the radiator, we're not going to have to drain any of the fluids as far as coolant, motor oil, anything like that. So we'll just move the radiator out of the way, take the spark plugs out, and then remove the valve cover. Okay, the first thing we're going to do is siphon the gas tank. Typically, if you want to do this job, I would recommend just waiting until you have like a little bit of fuel left in the tank. But for me, I didn't time it right, so this bike pretty much has a full tank of fuel. And when we take the tank off, it's going to be a pain because it's going to be heavy, number one, and then gas is going to be sloshing around and it's going to make a mess. So to make it easy, I'm just going to siphon everything out of the tank and then we can get started on the real stuff. Alright, now we're going to start removing the gas tank. The first thing to do is remove this bolt and the same one that's on the other side. Alright, so we're in the gas tank now. And basically we remove the crankcase breather hose and the overflow valve, which is this tube right here, and another tube down by the side. Now we're going to disconnect these connectors. There's two electrical connectors, one for the fuel pump and then one for the fuel level sensor. So we'll remove those two and the tank should come right off. Okay, so now we remove the fuel tank. Make sure to remove your crankcase or your gas tank breather hose, and then your larger one, which is your overflow valve. And then once you disconnect your fuel hose, I would recommend just putting a rubber glove over it, tying it up just so nothing gets in there. And then also, there's a green retainer inside your fuel hose that connects your fuel hose to your tank. Honda actually specifies you replace it, so I would recommend you do it. I'll link the part numbers and stuff down in the description. Now we remove the fuel tank. The next step is to get the steering dampener off and then the air filter housing, sorry. So we're gonna get these two bolts off, these two, and then underneath there's another two. Also, we're gonna have to remove the connector to the actual steering stem. Right on. Now we got to remove the air filter. So we're going to start taking off the housing, but the first thing is to come off your air filter. So we'll take these two off, release the ECM, take off the cover, which is the screws on the outside, take the air filter out, and then we can attack the housing. Since we got the air filter out, now we can start working on the air filter housing. So we're going to start with the upper air filter housing, which is a couple bolts around the edges. 1, 2, 3, 4. Also, we're going to remove these two, which I think is the MAP sensor, the manifold absolute pressure sensors. So we'll disconnect these, and then we can get these 4 bolts out. Next step is to take out these air funnels. So there's 2 screws each for each funnel. We'll take them out, lift them out, and then the whole air filter housing should pop back up. Okay, as you can see, we were able to get the air filter housing off, but it was a little bit more complicated than I originally thought it would be. You know, there's a lot of connectors, a lot of things that attach to the airbox that I didn't think about, but I really want to take a second and go through exactly what connects to the airbox. So I'll start with the electrical side. On the top side, we have these 4 connectors. Originally I thought they were the MAP sensors. I was wrong. They're actually connectors to the fuel injectors. So you have these 4 electrical connectors, and then the MAP sensor is actually down here. So it's the bottom right back side of the airbox. So the bottom right back corner of the airbox has a little electrical connector. Also, we have some hoses. So I'll start with the fuel hose. The fuel hose is probably the most important thing. The fuel hose has a similar connector that the gas tank has. It's like a little green clip that Honda, again, specifies you replace. I'll link the parts down in the description. So there's that. You gotta take off. And then we have some hoses. So on the left side of the airbox, we have a hose that connects to the pair system, which is basically it's just a system that puts fresh air in your exhaust pipe to burn it's an emissions thing, to burn any unburned gases that don't go off during the ignition in the cylinder. And then on the right side, we have the crankcase breather hose. So this just goes into your crankcase and lets it breathe. And then on the MAP sensor, you have another little hose. So it's right here. So you have another little hose that goes into the MAP sensor, and this hose pretty much feeds into your throttle bodies. Okay, our next job is to move the radiator. So like I said, we won't have to drain any of the coolant. We'll just have a bolt right here we have to take off, another bolt right here, another one on the other side, and then one on the bottom. Okay, so I originally planned to take the spark plugs out from the radiator side, from the bottom side, but it's looking like there's not going to be a lot of clearance, and it's going to be kind of a tough job from that side. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go from the top side and remove the spark plugs. So basically you're going to have these little connectors, these white connectors connected to these ignition coils. You'll pull the connectors off, there's 4 of them, and then pull the ignition coils out, and then you'll need a deep socket wrench. I think it's a 16 mil. Stick it in there and turn it, and you'll be able to pull out your spark plugs. But first, we got to remove this pair system because it's kind of in the way. Before we take the spark plugs out, I just wanted to mention that it'd be a good idea, and we're going to do this also before we take the valve cover off, is we're going to take like a disinfectant wipe or, you know, maybe a towel with some contact cleaner on it and go over and clean every surface just in case anything, once we take out the spark plugs, things won't fall in the engine. Like, as you can see, I did glove or cover up some of the fuel connectors, fuel hoses. Also, I'd recommend putting like paper towels or something, or covering your throttle bodies just so nothing gets in. You want this engine to be as clean as possible. Okay, so I was able to get out the first spark plug. Go and focus on that. And it looks like it's in pretty good shape. A little bit of carbon deposits, but nothing too serious. I found the trick is, I would use something like this. So it's a 16 mil socket, deep walled socket, with a pivot on the end, so it'll help you get in closer and maneuver around the valve cover. So basically, just kind of gonna go on and then it's gonna come off. So I'll finish up and then we can actually start taking off the valve cover. Now it's time to get the valve cover off. So we got 4 10mm bolts, one here, one in the center, and one all the way to the left. Now Honda does put some silicone gasket around the edge, so it's not going to come off that easily, but I cannot emphasize this enough. Do not take a flathead screwdriver and go in on the side and try to pry it off. If you need to get it off, just take a rubber mallet and tap the sides until it comes loose. Okay, so we got the valve cover off and we're ready to do the actual valve clearance check. So the first thing you want to do is remove this little cover, and then I'll expose this nut. And basically, there's a timing mark right here, and you'll want to line up that inside timing mark with this notch. And then I kind of drew a line 180 degrees opposite because you're going to need it for later. But basically what you want to see is the edge of your camshaft on the intake, this lined up flush with your case, and then the same with your exhaust. So that's how you know the engine is in top dead center, and that's how we're going to start this procedure. Alright, so once we got the engine in top dead center, the first thing we're going to do is check our clearances in cylinders 1 and 3 on the intake side. Then we're going to turn the engine over 180 degrees and then check the 2 and 4 exhaust valves. Then turn the engine over another time 180 degrees, check the 2 and 4 intake valves. And then finally, go 180 degrees and check your 1 and 3 cylinders on the exhaust side. And for the intake side, we're looking for a clearance of 0.17 to 23. It's different for different bikes, but this is what is out of the Honda CBR600 manual. And then on the exhaust side, we're looking for a clearance of between 0.25 and 0.31 millimeters. And now we're going to actually do our valve clearance check. So the cylinders are numbered from left to right, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4. And then your intake side is this side, your exhaust side is this side. So the side that's closer to your radiator is your exhaust, and the side closer to your throttle bodies is your intake. Now we're going to take like a feeler gauge. This is a .178 millimeter feeler gauge, and we're going to stick it between the bucket and the cam lobe. So we're kind of just going to take it and then stick it in. You should feel some slight drag, and if it's too loose, get a bigger one, measure the actual clearance, and then keep going until you measured all your cam lobes, all your clearances, write them down, and go from there. Alright, so I measured all the clearances, and to my surprise, everything was in spec. I did do the measurement twice, just to make sure. And the good news is, I will not have to remove the camshafts on this motorcycle. So there will be some of you who will have to replace some shims, and the first thing to do is to remove your cam chain tensioner. And what you're going to do is take off these two little bolts and like loosen them to the point where it's about to come off. Take this nut off, and you'll basically take like a little flathead screwdriver, put it in, and once you feel it bite, just keep twisting clockwise until you can't anymore, and you'll basically just pull it off. There is another way to do it where you don't have to actually remove this whole cam chain tensioner, and it requires a little Honda tool. The reason I don't recommend it is because it's a pretty small tool. It's just like a flathead screwdriver with like a little round piece on the end. And it's $100, and it's not really worth it. And you can just do it with like any old flat blade screwdriver. So I would recommend doing that. Alright, then the next step after you remove your cam chain tensioner is to start removing the camshaft followers, the holders. And they do have numbers. They're all numbered, every single bolt. And I don't know if you can see the numbers here. So this one's 19, 4, 1, 2. So basically what you're going to want to do is just a half turn at a time, loosen them in order, and your camshaft will come up evenly so it won't break or do damage to the camshafts, because from what I hear they're pretty brittle. And once you remove all the followers, your camshafts just come right out. And then also you're going to take your chain, and I would highly recommend tying it to your frame, or just moving it or tying it to something so it doesn't fall in the engine, because if it does, it's going to be a pain in the ass to get out. Same with your spark plug holes. I would recommend covering them or putting like a piece of tissue in there or something, so when you remove any of the shims, nothing will fall in your spark plug hole. It's not a big deal, but eventually you're going to have to flush, or you're going to have to get it out of your oil sump. To get to your actual shims, once you remove your camshafts and your cam chain tensioner and all that stuff, your shims will be located under these little buckets. So there's one here, you can see another one right down here. And basically just get a magnetic pick tool, put it on top, the bucket should come out, and the shim should come out with it. Okay, so there will be some things that Honda specifies that they want you to replace if you do remove your cam chain tensioner and camshafts. And the first two things you'd want to replace is this little gasket that goes around this cam chain tensioner. There's a little sealing washer that goes behind this. Also, there's going to be some sealing rings that go underneath the cam chain holder, or the camshaft holder, sorry. They're little grooves that kind of go in here, around your spark plug holes. Also, there are some sealing washers that go underneath some of the bolts that you will need to replace. Another thing I wanted to specify, when you remove, whether or not you remove your camshafts or not, it would be a good idea to take some type of grease and put it on the ends of your cam lobes, just so when you start the bike up, it has proper lubrication. And when you're picking out your grease, Really make sure and look and make sure that it is soluble in motor oil. The last thing you want is the grease you put in there to get into your oil filter, clog it up, and cause other problems. The manual actually specifies that you mix whatever grease you have, so I'm using just a regular assembly grease, with a 50-50 mixture of motor oil. Now once you remove your camshafts and you've removed the shims that are problematic, you're going to need to calculate your new shims that you're going to need to buy. And it's done with the simple formula. So you take your required shim equals your measured clearance minus your specified clearance. Specified clearance just means the clearance you want. So on the exhaust side, you want basically what's dead in between 0.31 and 0.25, which happens to be 0.28. And same on your intake side, you want something between 0.17 and 0.23, which happens to be 0.2. So subtract your specified clearance and then add. So that's where your micrometer comes in. You're gonna have to measure your problematic shim and add it into this calculation. And you should get the required shim you need to buy. FYI, I'm pretty sure the shims only come in lengths or widths of, I think, 5 thousandths increments. So you might not be exact, but as long as your new measured clearance is within range, you should be. All right, once you've replaced your shims, it's time to put the bike back together. Alright guys, the bike has fuel, and this is the moment of truth right here. See if she starts. Alright guys, thanks for watching. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them down in the comments. and I will be sure to get back to you.